Um, as always, we start by saying tonight's shiur Ili Nishmat of Morido Nuvan Halevi Imi Maroti Rachel Bat Harav Michael. And tonight we're going to talk about parshat Chayay Sarah. As soon as we get my notes up on the screen here, but we're going to actually begin our discussion of parshat Chayay Sarah. First, let me get myself set up here. Why is this? There we go. We're going to actually begin our discussion of parshat Chayay Sarah with two excerpts, one from parshat Noach and the other from parshat Vayera. Both of these are, excuse me, the concluding section of the parsha, the last few verses, primarily to give us I will say, a family tree table to get us into who we're talking about in this week's parsha. Interestingly enough, in parshat Noach, we are told that Terach has three sons, Avraham, Nachor, and Haran. Of course, Avraham later gets his name changed to Avraham. And interestingly enough, about Nachor and Haran, his two brothers, we are told very, very little. As a matter of fact, we're told nothing about Haran other than who he has his children. We're told one thing about Nachor, that he gets married, and that's it. However, their children and grandchildren are going to play significant roles in the narrative, as we've already seen with Lot, who is one of the descendants of Haran. Another one of the descendants of Haran happens to be Milcah, who happens to be married to Nachor. And a third child of Lot happens to be Yiscah. So we know that Haran, before he dies, that's the only thing we're told about in the Torah, is that he's born, has three children, and he dies. And that Nachor marries one of his daughters. The Midrash says that his other daughter, Yiscah, is none other than Sarah, that Avraham marries, but that's the Midrash. But clearly, Nachor, as I said, that's all we're told about Nachor. We've already read a lot about Lot and his part. And then in the end of Parshat Vayera, we are also introduced once again to Nachor and his wife Milcah, who have children also. And interestingly enough, very interestingly enough, if I were to ask you, how many children do you think Nachor had? You would say, I don't know, whatever he had. But I will tell you that Nachor had a very, very significant number of children. He actually had the same number that Yaakov Avinu had. He has exactly 12 children. By the way, there was one other individual in Bereshit who's also listed as having, not 12 children, 12 sons. Excuse me, I don't know how many daughters, but 12 sons. And they are listed here at the end of last week's parsha. And his youngest son is Betuel, who has a daughter named Rivka. So this, just to give you an idea of who Rivka is Avram's great niece, his brother's granddaughter. And obviously she's also, as we all know, at the end, the story is going to become his daughter-in-law. But it's interesting that the Torah specifically lists all of the sons of Nachor, and Rashi there specifically says the whole reason the Torah gives us this portion, this chapter, is only because we needed to know about Rivka. We needed to know who Rivka was, because we're going to be introduced to her in this week's parsha. If we hadn't had these 5 psukim before this week's parsha, we would have no clue who Rivka was, who Betuel was. We now, because of this parsha here from last week, we know that Betuel is Nachor's son and Rivka is his granddaughter. Okay. Having said all that, we move on to the story. Now, again, we know the Chayay Sarah in the Torah is written as 4 chapters. Chapter 1 is, of course, the story of Avram's purchase of the cave of Machpelah. And the second chapter, which is what we're going to focus on this evening, is the story of Rivka and how she is introduced to the patriarchal family, other than the fact that she's Avram's granddaughter, but living away from Avraham. She's never met Avraham. Probably most of Nachor's children haven't met Avraham, although we don't necessarily know that. The implication of the Torah, of the juxtaposition of these verses, that we read at the end of last week is that Nachor did not have children until after Avraham left, because it's Vayugad Avram. Avram is first told that Nachor had children, whereas Haran had children before Avraham leaves. Nachor, it seems, has no children also until later in life, as does Avraham Avinu. So just a thought, food for thought. Okay. Our parsha, the story that we're going to focus on tonight begins with Avram Zakein Ba Bayomim Hashem Yerachet Avraham Bakol, a general introduction to the story. Avram is getting on. Hashem has blessed him, and the focus of the story is now really shifts from Avraham to his Eved, Avram's servant, who is going to be basically the main character of this chapter. Of course, there are going to be lots of secondary characters introduced, such as, of course, Rivka, her family. But the primary character for this chapter, which is chapter 24 in Bereshit, is this Eved, who is not given a name. He's referred to as Eved. He has a couple of other words that are used at different points in the chapter, but he is never given a name. And he never gives himself a name. He doesn't even say who he is. So Avram, first thing he does, he calls him in one day, I guess, calls him in. Now he's referred to as Avdo Zekan Beito HaMoshel B'chol Asher. I guess I would say he was his charge d'affaires, or his chief of staff, we might say, yeah. And clearly, HaMoshel B'chol Asher means he was in charge of everything there was to be in charge of within Avram's household from a household management perspective. And Avram calls him and says, Simna yadcha tachat yorechi. Please place your hand under my thigh. Seems like a very strange request. And then Avram follows up with, Vashpiacho b'Hashem elokei hashamayim ve'elokei haaretz. I'm going to ask you to take an oath in the name of Hashem, the God of the heavens, the God of the earth. And the oath is, you should not take a wife for my son from the daughters of the Canaanites, in whose midst I dwell. Okay, we're going to get to the rest of this in a minute, but I wanted to focus first on this phrase of Simna yadcha tachat yorechi, place your hand under my thigh. And we're going to go for a minute to a couple of the parshanim and hear what they have to say about it, if we can find it somewhere here. Here we go. Okay. Rashi, which is probably the thing that if most people who've studied the parsha are familiar with, why tachat yorechi? Why is he asking him to place his hand under his thigh? We know that when one takes an oath, he has to be holding something, some object that is related to a mitzvah. Of course, he don't say for Torah or tefillin. We know, for example, if you've ever watched an American lawyer show, you know that when they go up to the witness stand, they pull out the Bible, and the person holds his hand on the Bible, holds up his right hand, and says, do you firmly swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? So we know this concept of either touching or in Torah's case, it's holding a sacred object, or an object that is used for the performance of a mitzvah when you take an oath. The purpose of this is that by taking this article, you're saying that, just like this is a mitzvah as commanded by God, so too my word has to be binding because I am swearing in by the existence that I believe in God. V'milah haita mitzvah rishonalo, since the milah was the first mitzvah that God commanded Avraham as a specific action mitzvah, ubalo al yedei tzar, and it came through only through great pain because he was 99 years old at the time before Brit Milah, haita chaviva alav, and this was very dear to him. V'nafla, therefore he asked Eliezer to put his hand near Avram's Brit Milah, and that was the object that he had to hold to take his oath. That's Rashi's opinion. Now, Ibn Ezra quotes that. He says, Yesh Omer Remez Lamila. Ibn Ezra says, yeah, I've seen that medrash that Rashi's quoted that says, Milah, the Ilu Hayat Kain. But he says, if that's the case, Hayat Nishba Brit Milah v'lo b'Shem, then he would say, take an oath because of the mitzvah of Brit Milah and not in the name of Hashem. But Karov Eli, Ibn Ezra says, now I think the Simna Yadcha Tachat Yorechi is a little bit more to the extent that Shehaya Mishpat Bayamim Hahem, The norm in those days, lasum adam yado tachat yerach mishahu birshuto, a person who is subservient to someone else would show that subservience by placing their hand under their thigh, under the thigh of the person that they were subservient to. Batam, and this is the symbolism of placing your hand under the person's thigh. Avram is saying to him, since you are under my control, place your hand there. Vadonyo shave vayerach al hayad. In other words, the master sits on top of the servant. In other words, by placing his hands, he's showing I'm above you because I'm sitting over you. Just like it's if to say that just like you, I can sit on your hand, your hand is under, and you have to agree that your hand is under my rule to do what I want you to do. Ibn Ezra ends adayin be'eretz Hodu. This was still, Ibn Ezra had heard that somewhere in the land of Hodu, somewhere in the land of India, this was still the norm, that people showed subservience to someone else by placing their hand under their thigh while they were sitting. Okay, that's Ibn Ezra. Rashbam adds another interesting thing. We have only one other place in the entire Tanakh where we have this phrase of Simna Yodcha Tachat Yerechi, Yosef Kishenish Yaakov. When Yaakov asks Yosef to bury him not in Egypt, but to bring him back to Eretz Yisrael for burial, he uses this same exact phrase, Simna Yodcha Tachat Yerechi, place your hand under my yerech. Okay, now Rashbam is going to say the following. He says, Kritot Brit, the creation of a covenant, the forging of a covenant, Ushvua shel ben li aviv, the Eved ladonav, and an oath. In other words, if a covenant was made between parent and child to fulfill certain, or an oath was taken, either a child to a parent or a servant to a master, kain haita, that was the norm. Shedoma inyan hashibud, in other words, it is enhanced. It is showing the subservience by being sat on. Ben Yechaved of the Eved Adonav, and he quotes a verse that says, "We know that a son honors his father, and a servant honors his master." Avol tekiyat kaf el kaf, handshake. Okritu davar lishnayim, or splitting a something in half. V'lavor ben b'tarav, and to pass between the parts. Mitsuya bishar b'nei adam, is only with other people, not a master to a servant to a master, or a child to a parent. In other words, if you have two unrelated parties entering into a pact, they will do it either via a handshake, or as we find in the case of Brit Ben Abitarim, where they cut something in half and together walk through the two parts to symbolize that just as these two parts are part of one inseparable whole, so are we too entering into this covenant where we are becoming one inseparable whole. So that's Rashbam. Now, B'chor Shor gives it very interesting, again, almost compendium of all the others that have come before us. He says, Regilam hayu latek yadam tachat yerach. The norm was they would place their hand under the thigh, b'shara shetokim emunatam v'nishbam, when they would swear fealty or oath or obeisance to a master. Just like we in our day do the same thing by a handshake. But he also says, why does he use this phrase? It really means, he's saying it really means place your trust under my feet, into my feet. To be subservient to me and to fulfill my orders like I was doing it myself. Just like I would go and do this myself, you too. That you will do what I've asked you in this oath. It doesn't mean that he literally places his hand there. B'chor Shor wants to say, he says, no, it's a figure of speech. That means symbolically you are accepting being subservient and accepting this role. Okay. Okay. And then he brings down a very interesting thought, very interesting thought, which I guess was prevalent back then. Minim omrim means the church would like us to believe that the reason for this because that he was symbolizing that that this is the birth of Yeshu. That's what they wanted to say. Yesh Lashivam, but the Bechor says that's nonsense. What kind of ridiculousness is that? Halolo Hora. They themselves believe that he's not human born, so how could he have been conceived by somebody else? Al Yidei Gever, Lahor Al Yidei Gever. He was not. He doesn't have a male father, so why would he have placed his hand there? If that was the case, in other words, he was there saying that, we see he was swearing by the name of Yeshu. And just as that's not. I just thought it was very interesting because something that would never occur to me. I don't know, but it obviously was something that somebody thought of, and I just thought it was interesting to bring down. Okay, let's get back to our story now. Okay, so in whichever case it is, the point of the Simna Yalcha Tachid Yorechi is to say, accept my authority, that you will do, and that you will take an oath to carry out this mission. Now, what is the mission again? He's got to go. He's not going to take a wife for a son from the Dod HaKnani who he lives with in their midst. Ki el artzi ve'el moladiti telech. You have to go to my land and my birthplace. The lakachto isha livni Yitzchak, and you'll take a wife for my son Yitzchak. Now we've talked about it in the parshat of Lech Lecha, where Hashem tells Avraham, Lech Lecha me'artzecha mimoladitecha, leave your land, your birthplace. And the question is, where was Avraham born and where was he living at the time? And clearly, if we look at Parshat Lech Lecha, Avraham, before he comes to Eretz Yisrael, was living in Haran, or otherwise known as Aram Narayim, Aram between the rivers, which would basically be, I guess it would be Iraq, rather than Ur, which is at the end of on the Persian Gulf, which is in, I guess it's, I think it's already Iran. So in any case, the question, and the Parshanim wrestle with this, is what does Avraham mean when he says Artzi vel moladati? Now we're clearly going to see that the Eved is not going to go back to Ur Kasdim. He's going to go to Haran. Okay? And interestingly enough, what Avraham doesn't say, if we think back to Hashem telling Avraham who he has to leave, he doesn't say, go to my father's house. He doesn't say, El Beit Avi Telech. Avraham specifically does not instruct the Eved to go to his family. You have to find a wife. Now, it's interesting that Avraham commands him only to leave the country, go somewhere else, find somebody there. And again, the Parshanim try to understand why. Perhaps we'll get to that in a little, because I want to look a little bit later. We're going to see a difference when we go through the whole story as repeated by the Eved. We're going to see a big difference here in how he characterizes this mission. Okay, the servant answers him, perhaps legitimate concern. Okay, I'll go there. I'll find a woman. She'll agree to marry him, but she'll say, wait a minute, I'm not going there. He's got to come here at least to meet me before the wedding. I'm not going there sight unseen. What am I going to do? Can I bring Yitzchak there to meet her? Nope. Yitzchak cannot go back there to meet her. She's got to be willing to come here, sight unseen. Otherwise, the deal's off. But Avraham gives him a little bit of chizuk. He says, Hashem, Hashem, who is the master, the God of heaven, who took me from my father's house and my birthplace. And he made all these promises to me that I'm going to give this land that you're living here to all of your descendants. He will send his malach in front of you, and you will be successful in finding a wife there for Yitzchak. However, in the case she doesn't want to follow you, you are free. You have fulfilled your mission. You're no longer bound by this oath. However, no matter what happens, don't bring my son back. Eved says, okay. He agreed. That's the end of the first phase of the story. So the first phase of the story is Avraham gives him this mission, and then now Avram's going to disappear from the story. That's it. Avram is finished. So we don't read anything. The only other story we're going to hear about Avram in the Torah, after he dispatched him and said he's going to remarry, he's going to have more kids, he's going to disinherit these kids by giving them something during his lifetime and giving everything to Yitzchak, and then he's going to die. That's all the Torah is going to say after this. So here, what the Torah is really trying to tell us is that Avraham, in entrusting this mission to Eliezer, his Eved, I blew it, I said Eliezer, to his Eved, has basically, from his perspective, finished his mission of forming the Jewish people. He has had Yitzchak. He has ensured Yitzchak is going to find a proper wife, a proper shidduch, and that's it. He has finished his mission. He goes on, as I said, he remarries, and he's basically finished. And the Torah is really telling us that this is it. We are seeing in this chapter, we're going to see the passing of the torch from patriarch number 1 to patriarch number 2. And we're going to see that at the end, toward the end of the story, very, very clearly and very, very directly. Okay. So the Eved begins his mission. Now, these two words here, seem entirely superfluous. Why does the Torah have to tell us that he took 10 camels from his master's camels? Why would we have thought? What camels would we have thought he took? Clearly, if he's Avram's Eved and Avram is entrusting him with this mission, he obviously is not a Ganav. He obviously isn't somebody who's going to steal somebody else's camels for this important mission. Why does the Torah emphasize it? Now, Rashi tells us very simply that Avram's camels were recognizable because wherever they went, they were muzzled so that they would not eat from somebody else's field or where they shouldn't be eating. Many of the Parshanim have a major problem with that. Midrash, by the way, Rashi didn't make it up, as most of Rashi's stuff he gets from a Midrash. But the problem with that is there's a famous Gemara about a Tana who was, a great Tana his name was Pinchas ben Yair, who happened to have a donkey. And the donkey was so righteous, it wouldn't eat untithed food. Story in the Gemara. So the Parshanim asked, wait a minute, you mean to tell me that Pinchas ben Yair is greater than Avraham, that his camels needed to be muzzled in order not to eat what they weren't supposed to eat? Pinchas ben Yair's food, not only wouldn't he eat something that was stolen, he wouldn't even eat food that didn't have the proper meiser taken off of it. So it seems very strange. However, there's another Midrash that wants to suggest Migmalei Adonav means that Avraham had clearly recognizable camels, not because they went muzzled, but because they were top of the line camels. They were real, the what would we say? The Lamborghinis, I guess, of camels. I don't know what, how I don't know. I'm not a camel expert, so don't ask me how does one know whether a camel is a Chevy or a Cadillac or a Lamborghini. I don't know, but obviously people back then did, at least according to this Midrash. But again, the Torah, as I said, doesn't just say he just took 10 camels. He took 10, presumably 10 special camels. The other question is, why did he need 10 camels? What was he going to do with 10 camels? So again, a lot of the Parshanim try to understand what is going on. Why did he take 10 camels? Because later on, we're going to see that, firstly, he's not riding the camels, by the way. He's walking in front of the camels. Camels are not for him to ride. We're going to see later on that the camels are for the prospective bride and her entourage to ride. So did he need 10? I don't know. There's nowhere where it suggests how many, but clearly he wanted to take 10, perhaps to make sure he made a proper impression. I think others want to say that the 10 is symbolic, that there really weren't 10, but the Torah says 10 to symbolize the Aseret HaDibrot that this all represents. And there's another point in the story where we'll have the number 10 and also the Aseret HaDibrot. But I don't know. The simple fact seems to be the Torah says he took 10 camels because that's how many he took. Why did he need 10? Because he decided 10 was a good round number to take. Okay. He goes and he ends up, as I said, he doesn't go to Ur Kasdim, he goes to Aram Naraim El Ir Nachor, the city where Nachor lives. And we all, I think, know the basic storyline. The camels reach the well in the afternoon, in the late afternoon, when everybody is coming out to draw water. And he makes this, quote, request of God. He says, Hashem, help me out here. Interestingly enough, by the way, he uses this phrase "Hakrei na lefanai hayom," which we're going to get into in 1 minute. But he says, "Please help me out because here I am by the well. I don't know anybody in town. I don't know who to go ask. I need some help. So I'm going to find a girl coming up to the well. I'm going to ask her to give me some water, and we'll see what she has to say. And if she gives me water and then gives my camels water, that must mean she's the right one because she's the one who has the midot that Avram's family is going to need. She's willing to help a total stranger who theoretically she has every reason not to help. What do you mean? You're a guy. What do I schlep water for you? Here's the pitcher. You go schlep your own water if you don't have a pitcher. If you don't want to borrow my pitcher, fine, borrow it. She doesn't say that. That's what he says. He says, she'll give me water and she'll give the camels water. That must be a good sign. And of course, we know he's just about finished talking. Rivka shows up. And it's interesting because the Torah again emphasizes here, Yotzei, we already learned who Rivka was. We just had it last week's parsha who Rivka is. Asher Yuldu Livetuel ben Milkoish Nachorachi Avraham. Torah gives us all of this information. It's very interesting because every time we're introduced to Rivka, it tells us her lineage. We're going to see the same thing next week in Parshat Toldos. Yitzchak marries Rivka. Who is Rivka? Sual's daughter, Lavan's brother, Lavan's sister. It gives her whole family connection every time she's introduced, interestingly enough. Why that is, I think Rashi tells us in the beginning of Parshat Toldos as to emphasize that even though we would have thought that some of their characteristics might have rubbed off on her, they didn't. So that she was able, despite perhaps her negative lineage, which might have disqualified her, was able to overcome that. At least that's what Rashi wants to say. That's why it mentions this every time. Okay. She's carrying some type of water receptacle, the chada. Kad is some type of pitcher. How big it was, I have no idea. How much water it held, I have no idea. And then we have a very, very, very strange pasuk. This young maiden was tovat mar'emod, was very beautiful to look at. Betula, she was a virgin, and no man knew her. Again, strange. What do you mean no man knew her? Well, if she's virgin, obviously no man knew her. What does that mean? But anyway, she goes down to the well, fills up her thing. He runs to greet her, says, "Give me some water." And here in three very short psukim, it tells us it goes through the events of what happened. She says, "Drink." She hurries. Vatmaher, again, this word here that we had last week with Avraham serving the guests, this concept of alacrity in performing a mitzvah. Vatmaher, and again, Vatmaher, twice it says Vatmaher here in this three short psukim that she hurries to do this mitzvah. And not only does she give him water, but again, she gives water to all the camels. Now think about it, 10 camels. I don't know how much a camel drinks, but it's a lot of water. If you got 10 camels coming from a relatively long journey, they just traveled all the way from Eretz Yisrael all the way to Haran. Presumably their tanks are pretty empty. They got to fill up. It's like going and filling up 10 cars. But not just pumping the gas. It's, drawing the gas out of the water, except it's water, drawing the water out of the well for all of these 10 camels. It's not an easy task. So when the camels finish drinking, he gives her this jewelry. And again, interestingly enough, I told you number 10 was going to show up again. Two bracelets, which each or together weigh 10 pieces of gold. Interestingly enough, Parshanim tell us, oh wow, that's Shnai Tzmidim and Asara Zahav. That's a symbolic of the two luchot and the Asara Hadibrot that are written on the two luchot. He's already giving allusions to the fact that she's going to be the one who's going to be the ancestress of the people that are going to accept the Torah. Nice midrash. Then after he takes these things, now it doesn't say what he does with, just as Vaikach Lishnezim Zahav. And he takes these two bracelets, but he does say al yodah for her hands. It doesn't say that he places them on her hands. It says he takes them. He takes them out of his pocket. I don't know. But the Parshanim want to say that no, he didn't really take them out. He gave them to her. Otherwise, why would it tell us that? Then he at first asked her who she is. Please tell me. And by the way, is there room in your house for us to stay overnight? She answers him, who he is, Bat Milka, Ben Batzol, Ben Milka, Shiol Nachar. And she says, yeah, we got plenty of place to sleep. And he says, Baruch Hashem, wow, I made it and I'm here. Now, it's interesting, interestingly, he gives her the jewelry before he asks who she is. We're going to see later on in a minute that when he tells her family, that order is reversed. We'll get to that in a minute. But we'll have to try to understand why did he change the order and why didn't he do that? Okay, so let's continue. And then we know she goes, tells what's happening. She has a brother, Lavan. We're now introduced to for the first time. And he runs out to the well. Again, notice this word, vayaratz. He runs. He's got a guest waiting by the well. She's already met him. And he runs to do it. Now, all the parshanim want to give Lavan a bad reputation. Lavan has a negative reputation, but that's not from here. It's from 2 weeks later when we get to Parshat Vayetze and he's dealing with Yaakov Avinu. We're going to see Lavan is not, but it seems here it's not warranted. He's running. He does everything he does. Same thing Avraham did. Avraham ran to greet guests. He's running out to the well to greet the guests. And what does he do? He says, Bo, come on into the house. Why are you waiting outside? Come on, the house is all clear. There's room for the camels. I cleared out everything. We're all set. The inn is clear and open for guests. Come on in. So as I said, if this was the only time in the whole Torah that Lavan appeared, we would probably say, wow, what a great brother. Rivka such a great brother. No wonder she turned out so great. Look at this whole family, they're into Gmil Chasadim. They welcome these total strangers into the house. Okay. He comes in, he feeds the camels, and what do? Oh, right away, he washes his feet, they give him water to wash his feet, and they immediately make son lefanav lechol. They're ready to feed him. Oh, hey, you came from a long journey. What do you do next? You feed him. Sounds like the right frame of mind, perfect hospitality, anything you could ask for. But he says, wait a minute. Lo chaladim dvarti dvarai. Hold on. I got a story to tell you before. And they said, okay, got a story. Fine, we'll listen to the story, then we'll eat. No problem. Okay, I'm going to skip here. This is, again, we go through this whole story. And then, well, we'll get to the end in a minute. But now I want to go and compare the whole story, because that's where we're now at the point where he's basically going to say who he is, why he's there, and what happened, and how he got to them in the house. Okay, it's interesting. He starts with Eved Avraham Anochi. First, he introduces himself. Okay, he tells them exactly who he is, and he doesn't introduce himself by name. He says, "I am Avraham's servant." Now, clearly, they recognize who Avraham was. Again, whether Nachor is the presumption is Nachor is no longer alive, because we hear about Tuel, we're going to hear about Lavan. We don't hear about Nachor, but nonetheless, Avraham was somebody that they knew. They must have had a family tree somewhere with, Avraham, whatever. He was the guy who ran away from home. We don't know what happened to him. But at least they had some idea of who he was. And interestingly, he starts with Hashem Berachet Adoni, which is where the parsha began, but that's not part of the story. It's that we were told that Hashem blessed Avraham. Ma'od, very exceedingly, and he's great, and he's given him all of these things. He has all these possessions, and then Sarah has a son, and these 3 psukim are basically his introduction. Who am I? And here's why. I'm telling you now why I'm here, because Avraham has this son, and he's rather wealthy, and Vayashpieni Adoni Lemor, my master asked to take an oath, swearing, Lo tikach isha livni b'not hakani asher anochi yoshev be'artso. Okay, now if you look on your right side, right, first column, right-handed column, is what actually happened when Avraham asked him, what Avraham said to him. This left side is his repetition of what happened. Notice the green is the exact same words. The yellow is different. He says, okay? You can't marry the Canaanites who I live in their land, whereas here he says, Bikirbo, who I live in their midst. Okay, the Parshanim tell us that one of the things that Avraham is greatly concerned with, because the Parshanim, the Medrash asked a very simple question. Why did Avraham care who Yitzchak married? If he doesn't want him to marry an idolater, he's going to stay single for the rest of his life. There's nobody else to marry. Okay? So, whether you marries an idolater whose family lives in Canaan or an idolater from his own family back in Haran, what difference does it make? Okay? And the answer is right here, very simply. And that's why Eliezer again, the Eved changes it to be Artzo. Bikirbo means Avram is saying, hey, I don't want him marrying one of the local women folk. Why? He marries one of the local women folk, he's going to have all of her family to contend with. They'll all be living in proximity. They're going to be going every month to Donishtig and Freitag. They'll be going to a simcha. They'll be going to a family get together. They'll be going to this, that, and the other thing. And he's going to be part of their family, not his own family. Okay. Whereas if he goes back to home, then perhaps, and that's why, again, Avram makes this big deal. He cannot leave because she's got to come here so that she will not be, in other words, if he goes and lives in Haran, it's going to be the same thing. I don't want him. I want him living here where he's totally separate, isolated from her family so that he doesn't have to intermingle with them. He doesn't have to intermingle with the local folk, and he'll be able to raise his own family in his own Dalit Amod, in his own atmosphere, in his own environment without any untoward influence from outside. But the Evet does not want to tell them that. The Evet cannot tell them that, oh, the only reason Avram didn't want to marry because he doesn't want him to have anything to do with your family would have been pretty offensive had he said that implication. So he changes it to be Artsa. And he also changes, even Avram says, Ki el Artsi li el moladati. Avram doesn't tell him to go to his family. He just tells him, go to where I live, because no matter who you'll find somebody who you're going to bring home who will not be with her family anymore. However, Avram tells them, no, you got to go to my family. What now? The Parshanim are asked, when Avram said El Artzi El Moladati, did he really mean Artzi just go to Haran, or did he really mean go find my family in Haran? And that's what Moladati, because Moladati, we have other places where Moladati literally means my birthplace, but it also means my kinsman, my birth family. The word Moledet can also mean my nuclear family or my extended family. So the Parshanim are trying to understand whether whether the Evet makes up this concept of El Beit Avi just to make them feel good, or that's really what Avram's intent was, and that's what he really said when he said Moledet. He means go to my family. Either way, the Evet tells them what he wants them to hear, so that his whole story is purposely worded to achieve a result. And the result is that they will say yes at the end. That's all he's interested in. What else happens and whether he has to, modify a few words, isn't it? It's a presumably, whether he well rehearsed it on the way over to the house, I don't know. But he clearly, as part of his mission, knew that he had a selling job to do. And it's a two-part selling job. One is he's got to convince them to say yes in the first place. Yes, we will agree to give our daughter to this guy, even though he's not coming here sight unseen. We are willing. But secondly, we're willing to never meet him. We may never meet him because she's coming with me. And not only that, we're going to see later on, he doesn't even want to hang around. He wants to leave as quickly as possible. So he's got a pretty tough three-part selling job here. One, to get him to agree to the marriage. Two, to get him to agree to the marriage, even though the groom isn't showing up. And three, to let him to agree to let him take her immediately. So we're going to see all three of these he's working towards selling all three of these things. Once he's met her and found out that she's from Avram's family, especially. Okay. And it's interesting because he shares with them his concern. Well, what if she doesn't want to come? Okay, I'll get there, I'll meet her, but she doesn't want to come. And he says, Avram answers him. Again, this is the part he wants to notice. You'll notice the part here that he says is missing a whole bunch of stuff. He leaves out the part where Avram tells him, no, don't let every Yitzchak go back there. But he does tell him that Avram is of the impression that Hashem will send a messenger so that you'll be able to find again, this wife will come from my family, from my father's house, not just Misham, not just any old girl who happens to live in Haran. Okay. Now, it's interesting. Avram said you'll be free from the oath if she doesn't want to come with you. But no, he tells them you'll be free from the oath if you get to my family and they don't want to give her over, don't want to allow her to get married, then you'll be free. So he's telling them slightly different because he wants them to understand that this is it. This is the only place I'm stopping here. Either you're going to say yes, and I'm going to go home with her, or you're going to say no, and I'm going to go home without her. But there's no other options at this point. Okay, and then he says, Midrashically tells us that, by the way, even though I just told you that you have to give a lot of water to the camels, Medrash says that Avram that the Eved got there on the same day he left. He had super swift camels. That Hashem gave him Fitzat Haderach, that he was able to achieve the whole journey in one quick day. That's a midrash because it says Hayom, that I got here today, which was basically, he says, the same day I left, the same day I came. It's a midrash. But as I said, the parshat of the pasuk seems to be that obviously it took whatever time it takes to get by camel, to get by on foot. Because remember, he's not riding the camels. He is walking the camels there because they're the transportation home. And then he tells them how, you'll notice when he tells them about his conversation with Hashem, he basically uses much of the same wording. And then he tells them, and this is the key, this is really the key to the whole story. I had literally not even finished this prayer to God when Rivka came out. The Chadal Shichma, she's carrying her pitcher. She went down to the well to draw water. And I said, please give me some water to drink. Okay. By the way, Kliyakar has a very interesting comment on this pasuk, where it says, Hakreina lefanai. I'm going to go down to the Kliyakar here so we can read it, because this is a very interesting comment on the whole story. The story, if we were to, before we get to this Kliyakar, if we look at this story, our assumption is that the fact that Rivka shows up was perfectly normal. As Eliezer did it again. Eliezer himself says, hey, the daughters are coming out to draw water, but in reality, the waters didn't generally go out to draw water. And Kliyakar is going to focus on that, right? Kliyakar says, his prayer to Hashem, Eliezer says, Hakreina lefanai hayom. Please cause this to happen before me today. Yesh omrim, he brings down an opinion. His request is specifically for, and not just any old young lady to show up, but a young lady from an important family, she'ein darka, let's say, kalal, who never leaves home. She certainly wouldn't go out to draw water. It would be the servant's job. She would never go out. And she should now, because Hashem will send her out, he specifically doesn't want one who normally goes out and draws water, because if she goes out and draws water all the time, she's probably somebody who's flirting with all the guys around the well. She's not somebody who I'm looking for Yitzchak. I want somebody who never goes out of the house, but now, Hashem, do me a favor and send her out. And that's what the phrase in the Torah says, when nobody knew her. Nobody even knew who she was. She never left the house. She was always home, stayed home. She was homeschooled. She was sitting at home with her parents and family. She never left home. This was the first time in her life she had left her home. That's why he's going to have to ask her who she is. Why didn't he ask all the other people? Well, as she was drawing the water, who is she? Right? Why did he say that? Because he didn't know. Nobody else knew who she was. Nobody else knew who she was. So the point is, she was, and even in the town, nobody knew her. So she is. That's why he asked her who she is. Very interesting, Kliyakar. Okay, and the other thing that I think is very important is what she does. She, again, gives him to drink from the pitcher, and then she immediately empties the water from the pitcher into the trough and says, I'm going to give all the camels. Me'am Lois brings down a very, very interesting comment on Rivka's actions. He says, if you think about it, Rivka, after she gives him to drink, is faced with a major dilemma. What's her major dilemma? I got a pitcher of water here. He just drank from it. Now, obviously, if he asked me to give him a drink, he's probably sickly, probably can't go down to the well himself. So he asked me to give him a drink. Do I want his germs on my pitcher that I'm now bringing home to my family? What am I going to do? Well, let's see. If I spill it out, that won't look good because it'll embarrass him. Hey, why are you spilling out all that good water? Just because I took a drink from it? Big deal. So she comes up with a great solution. She says, I poured it into the trough, let the camels drink it. Great, solve all the problems. And that's what she does. Okay, it's a nice ma'am lois because it helps. Not just is she gomel and chesed, not only is she kind to him and to it by giving water to all his camels and to him, but she's also thoughtful. She doesn't want to embarrass him in front of whoever might be there by spilling the water out. So it's interesting if we go through all of the parshanut and all of the story, how many different aspects in this one seemingly very brief interaction at the well, he is looking and seeing different characteristics, or the parshanim. I don't know if he's seeing it. I don't know if she's seeing it, but the parshanim are ascribing all of these powerful characteristics of chesed, of things that we want to imbue our children with, how to be sensitive to others, how to be kind to others. These are all characteristics that we are learning. Whether that's what Rivka was really thinking or not is irrelevant. The point is the Parshanim are showing us why is it that Eliezer picks this test of all tests. And the Gemara itself asks, the Parshanim asks, wait a minute, we have a halacha of nichush, lo tzanachashu. You're not allowed to seek omens or signs. Why is what the Eved does not nichush? And the answer is it's not really nichush. It's very simply it's a character test, because he doesn't say, well, if she's 3 feet, if she's 6 feet tall and has red hair, then I'll pick her. He says, I'm going to give her a test. Will she give water to a stranger? Which is a pretty interesting way to test somebody. If you think about it, what do we do when we look for a shidduch? What do we do? All too often we focus on all the wrong things. However, perhaps the Eved is focusing on the right things. How is she react to strangers? What does she do? Again, she had every reason to say no. Here is an able-bodied man with his whole entourage standing around. I mean, because it says that it says later he brings all of Huva Nashim Asherito. When Lavan brings him into the household, it's him and his whole entourage come into the house. It's not just one guy with 10 camels. It's a guy with a whole traveling caravan, because nobody would travel alone through the desert. You needed a caravan to travel with. So he's traveling with a whole group of people. And they're all just standing around. They're all able-bodied men. Why are they asking her to give water? She had every reason to say no, thanks you. But nice to offer me an opportunity to do you a favor. But hey, come on, go do it yourself. But she doesn't. So again, we see clearly that the test is a very, very appropriate test, because it's how do you relate to somebody who may or may not need help, may or may not be able to help themselves. When they ask for help, do you feel, no, do it yourself? Unfortunately, we all have that sometimes within us. We'll see somebody come, whether it's I think the most likely example is tzedakah. Somebody comes and they appear to be perfectly fit and fine, and they're asking for a handout. And you say, go get a job. What do you want from me? I mean, that's our internal listening. And the answer is sometimes we don't know the rest of the story. Could be that they just underwent some kind of invisible medical problem. It could be they have some other issue. We don't know. So here she doesn't know. Why is he asking her for water? He seems to be an able-bodied man surrounded by a whole entourage. Why is he asking for water? She doesn't ask. She just says, okay, somebody's asking for help. I will see if I can do something to help him. And I think that's a very, very important characteristic that the Torah wants us to understand. As the Gemara itself says, if we have people who are the characteristics of Am Yisrael are Rachmanim, Baishanim, Gomle Chasadim, that we are merciful, we are generally bashful, and we are doers of kindness. We seek out ways to do kindness to others, and this is very evident when it's Eretz Yisrael is the first one to have a medical team flying to all over the globe to help whenever Rahman al-Islam there's a quote natural disaster or emergency. We're always the first ones there because of this inborn characteristic. We understand that HaKadosh Baruch Hu has given us gifts to help others, not only for our own usage, but HaKadosh Baruch Hu has given us the gifts to use to help in the service of others. I think Rivka clearly understands that, and that's why she is able to instantaneously say, sure, here's a drink. Oh, by the way, you want you got a bunch of camels. Let me take care of them too. So we see not just does she care about him, but she's also worried about the animals, his possessions. So lots of different powerful lessons here. And I think at the end, when we get to the end of the story, interestingly enough, by the way, one other thing I wanted to say before I get to the end of the story. As I said before, it's interesting that when he gives it, it says he takes out the jewelry and then he asks her who she is. Whereas when he tells the family, he says, who are you? And she tells him who he is, and then he gives her the jewelry. I think the Parshanim, there's a group of Parshanim that want to say, well, he actually took out the jewelry but didn't really give it to her, and that his story at the end is really the true story. I would like to agree with the Parshanim who said, no, he gave it to her first and then asked who she was. And the answer is because, again, go back to the original request Avraham made. Avraham didn't ask him to go find somebody from his family. He asked him to go find somebody in his neighborhood, in his old stomping grounds. And once he finds her, he's convinced she's the right one, whether she's from the family or not. It's great that she's from the family, but he doesn't care. He's given her the jewelry. He's going to take her home even if she's not from the family. Once she's passed his test, he's ready to take her home, even if she's not from the family. The fact that she is a bonus. But when he tells the family that's one of his selling points, that Avraham specifically said, come to my family. So he can't tell him that he gave her the jewelry before he knew who she was because he was willing to accept somebody who wasn't from the family. Because they'll say, oh, if that's the case, forget it. We don't want to go find somebody else. You're willing to take somebody else. So part of his selling point was that, it was after he realized she was from the family, that's when he said, oh, this has got to be the right one. So he switches the order specifically to, again, gain another selling point. And it's interesting, he does a great job. We know he does a great job. Why? Because at the end, he asked them, okay, now give me your answer. In Pasuk Mem Tet, here we see he asked them the answer. And the answer they give is, Me Hashem yatzah davar lo nuchal daber elecha ra'uto. Basically, he fully succeeds because of this whole story and telling the whole story, he succeeds in his mission and gets them to. By the way, the last part is of the parsha is then he asks them, okay, the next morning he goes to sleep. The next morning he gets up, okay, I'm ready to go home. Let's go. And they say, wait a minute, whoa. We know that, you got to give her time. She's got to go through her whole makeup and preparation and whatever. Not taking her today. Come back in a year or 10 months or so. Give her a time to get ready, then come back and we'll take her. And he says, no, we're going now. So what do they say? They say, let's call her and ask her. And what does it say? Very interesting pasuk. They called Rivka and they said to her, will you go with this man? And she says, I will go. Now, it's interesting. Rashi on Vatomer Elech says, why did she say Elech? I'll go. Why didn't she just say okay? Why did she say I'm going? And Rashi says she said I'm going. Even if you guys don't want to let me go, I'm going. An interesting thing. And why does he say that? Because she could have just said, sure, okay. Interestingly enough, I've always wondered. This is one of these psukim that has a very, very interesting connotation and can have two completely different, with numerous different meanings. They say, will you go with this man? Now, the question is, what was their body language or their accentuation when they said, will you go with this man? Was it, will you go with this guy? Or was it, will you go with him? And I think when Rashi's comment says, I'm going to go even if you don't want me to, goes back to, they didn't expect her to say yes. They expected her to say, oh, no, I'm not going. I expect my prospective groom to come and pick me up, and we'll ride off into the sunset, like any good Hollywood movie would, right? Not going to go with the servant. What kind of nonsense? But she says, no, I'm going. And perhaps, I don't remember where I saw this, one of the parshanim says, perhaps, just like they didn't want her to go, she really did want to go. She wanted to get out. She was perfectly happy to get out of the environment she was in, because she didn't feel comfortable in that environment. Because of who she was, maybe she felt her growth was being stifled, whatever. She really wanted out of home anyway. Again, especially according to that Chayay Sarah, that she was a prisoner in the house and was never allowed out, would certainly make a lot of sense that she'd want to say, of course I'm going to go. What kind of question is that? I got somebody who wants me. I'm going. So again, interesting. By the way, as I said, you'll notice Eved Avraham Anashav, he had a whole entourage that he came with him, and they give her a bracha and they leave. And here's where we have the torch pass. Yitzchak is coming out. They're on their way home. Yitzchak is coming out, and he's dwelling in the Negev. He goes out one night to the field. Lasuach, according to the Midrash, is to pray. He's davening. He's going out from where everything is. Vayar, he looks up his eyes. He sees camels coming. Rivka sees him, and vatipol me al hagamal. She falls off the camel. Tipol could also mean she alights from the camel, but tipol, the most common form is she falls off her camel. But Tomer Eved, she asks the Eved, who's been her escort the whole way, who's that guy? I just saw some guy off in the distance walking our way. Who is he? Vayomer ha'Eved hu Adoni. He is my master. So we see already that the torch has been passed from Avraham, because at the beginning of the story, who is he? He's Avram's Eved. By the end of the story, whose Eved is he? He's Yitzchak's Eved. Very interesting way the Torah very simply hands off the baton between Avraham and Yitzchak. Although we'll see it gets handed off again in the chapter that follows this, but it's very, very clear here that Yitzchak is now ready to step forward and become the central figure in the narrative, after Avraham is going to be, just like we have other characters who are central figures, and then we read very briefly about what happens to them after they step off center stage. In the case of Noah, after he has this whole incident with the vineyard, nothing else is written about him. Even though he's going to live another 300 plus years, nothing more is written about him except that he lives till the age of 950 and dies. We have other characters throughout Lot. Once he has his story, he never appears again. So we see that the Torah, once the focus is shifted away, it very, very briefly summarizes the rest of the story. But here we see clearly the torch has been passed now to Yitzchak to be the primary character. Interestingly enough, from Samson Raphael Hirsch brings a very powerful lesson from the last verse of the parsha of this chapter. Yitzchak brings her into the tent of his mother mother Sarah, excuse me. He takes Rivka, she becomes his wife, and then he falls in love with her. Very interesting. Rav Hirsch very, very strongly says this is the way it's supposed to be. You're supposed to pick a woman not because you've fallen in love with her before you get married. You're supposed to pick a woman because she's got the right midot, she's got the things you are looking for in a Jewish wife. And then after you've been together a while, you fall in love. Very interesting and very different than many of the other ways people look at the world of love and marriage. And it's a very interesting thought. And only then is Yitzchak consoled after he's found a proper wife, is he consoled that over the death of his mother. With that, the parsha concludes the story. Then, as I said, we revert back to one more chapter about Avraham. The final chapter talks about the descendants of Yishmael at the end of the parsha, and then next week we get to Toldot, where Yitzchak and Rivka become the new central focus of the Torah going forward. So as I said, lots and lots of interesting lessons. And as I said, the fact that Avraham is willing to entrust this mission to his Eved shows you the complete faith he has, not only in the integrity of the Eved, but in that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is going to watch over him and make sure that everything works out okay. as Hashem has promised him. So Avraham has complete faith in HaKadosh Baruch Hu's promise, and that is why he's willing to move on and leave center scene. So thank you all. I hope you all learned something about the parsha, and I hope I open up now for questions, comments, and feedback. So anybody, any questions or comments? Okay, if not, I will say thank you. Have a good rest of the week. Hey, Shabbat Shalom. We'll see you next week. Laila Tov.
Laila Tov. Thank you.